Welcome to Understandable Insights, Information to Intelligence with Sue Gordon. The National Security Podcast provides you an elemental understanding of the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. I'm Eric, joined each week by the Honorable Sue Gordon, and together we'll break down the headlines shaping our world and ask how we should be thinking and acting as citizens and leaders across issues in intelligence, technology, and business. It's September 8th, 2025. Let's get to it. Hey, Sue, how are you?
Hey, Eric, I'm good. Thanks for asking. I love fall. Great sports season.
Yeah.
Always something to watch. I love athletic competition because of the uncertainty of it. I'm not even a Bills or a Ravens fan, but that game last night was insane.
That was great. Yeah, much better football than you expect from week one. And there were certainly some disappointing games, some teams still getting used to it. But, man, it felt like a playoff game when those two meeting in week one.
Dallas won, right, Eric?
No, they did not. They lost to the Eagles.
So mean.
Yeah.
So let's see. So first, I want to show off my Texas Western 1966 hat.
That's pretty cool.
I know. It's super cool. For those of you that don't know, Texas Western is now UTEP. 1966 was the year they won the first national championship against Adolph Rupp and Kentucky against a brilliant Kentucky team with, by design, a team of all Black players. And it was seminal. And so I was just thinking that at a time when we have questions about whether diversity is good, had that not happened, and it would have happened later, but
Sure.
Things have to happen and change begets change. I don't think we would have the robust basketball and sports environment had someone like Texas Western not made that move. And then the second thing is former Secretary of the Air Force, Dr. Heather Wilson, one of my dearest friends, and again, Eric, one of those people that I know I'll never be as smart as, is the president of UTEP. I think it's not super well known that UTEP is a huge research university. And what is so interesting about it is where it sits in El Paso, right across the river from Mexico. And a huge percentage of UTEP students are not only first-generation Americans, but first-generation college attenders.
Yeah.
And what they've done is amazing. And UTEP has great research in aerospace and AI. And so what I love about this, and one thing is I just think Heather is amazing. We've talked about the fact that our biggest supply chain issue is talent. And the idea that every talented human in America is going to go to the same schools or leave home, I think is misguided. And so we have to have a way to get to all the talent. And so I love the UTEP story. So look it up. Look at what Heather has done during her tenure. I should know how long she's been there. I think she might have gotten there in 2018. Anyway, it's just a great story. And then the last thing I'm just going to share is this arrived in the mail for me. Can you see it, Eric?
Yeah. So for those listening on Apple and Spotify, it looks to be a large water bottle signed by the Caitlin Clark.
Yeah, it's my Caitlin Clark jug. And it's got my number on the bottom. Caitlin Clark wears my number.
In homage to you?
Homage to me.
Nice.
Yeah, she probably picked it out because she's not a bit fuzzy. If she played now, it would be a good model for me.
There you
Pretty
go.
excited about that.
All right. Go Miners. Shout out to UTEP there, unless they're playing the Longhorns or Navy.
Yeah.
All right. Let's get to some headlines. So this week in the threat picture, the Trump family's new crypto token, World Liberty Financial, WLFI, launched, and billions in paper wealth, raising serious national security questions about conflict of interest, market manipulation, and financial vulnerabilities tied to the first family. U.S. forces strike alleged traffickers off Venezuela under a counter-narcotics banner, but could it be regime pressure dressed as drug war with oil, China, and Maduro's alliances in the crosshairs? Senator Warner classified visit to NGA was canceled after right-wing influencer Laura Loomer rallied online outrage. sparking new concerns over whether congressional oversight can be derailed by tweets or truths. A Forbes op-ed argues the real national security front lines are local, from water systems to cyber defenses. So we'll start with the crypto and the Trump family exchange. On September 2nd, the Trump family's new crypto venture, World Liberty Financial, moved from buzz to market reality when its token, WLFI, began trading publicly. The price whipsawed from about 40 cents at launch down to 21 cents before stabilizing near about 23. Yet on paper, the family's holdings, $22.5 billion locked founder tokens, still translate into roughly $5 billion in wealth. The company also touts a governance model and a separate dollar-pegged stablecoin, USD1. We talked about stablecoins in a previous episode, underscoring how a few volatile sessions can dramatically alter the family's balance sheet and public scrutiny. And scrutiny is growing. Watchdog groups and Democratic lawmakers have flagged potential conflicts of interest. A sitting president actively promoting crypto policy while his family controls and benefits from a major token and related products. The White House rejects those claims, saying neither the president nor his family has engaged or will engage in conflicts. Meanwhile, the Genius Act, signed in July, set the first federal rules for stablecoin, a category tied directly to the Trump-backed ecosystem via USD1. So, obviously a very fine line here, Sue, with potential conflicts of interests. Beyond the ethics, what are some of the national security stakes that you see here between, we talked a little bit before about illicit finance, foreign influence, and especially when the first family is effectively a market-moving crypto issuer?
So before we put aside the ethics conflict of interest, I would be a lot happier if there was any discussion at all about what the theory behind the case of digital currencies, cryptocurrencies was, that it would be briefed
Yeah.
to our oversight committees and that we understood where this was. We'll come back to that. I guess mine is just a straight up national security play. We talk a lot about the threat that Russia poses to the United States. Their aim is to undermine democracy, especially that which is practiced by the U.S. And China believes that now is the moment that it is prepared to outcompete us and to substitute their market strategy for ours. So I don't think I can be strong enough in terms of how important the stability of monetary policy and U.S. underpinnings of that market has been important to global stability. So then if you say we're going to start having different objectives with what we're trying to do, I think that's problematic in this geopolitical environment with a China that has it as a broad objective. And since we've basically alienated so many of our friends, including people that President Trump had said he had a great relationship with in terms of Russia, China, and India. So I don't think this is a super good moment for us to be messing with monetary policy or putting monetary policy in the hands of individuals. So that's one. Number two is, it is hard for me to be heartened by the Trump family saying, oh gosh, this is nothing to see here.
No conflicts.
No conflicts, that we're not in it for ourselves. Not the dinners at the White House, not the Rose Garden Club, not the meeting with tech bros when Mark Zuckerberg says, I didn't know what number you wanted me to say, so I just made one up. So I think that's a destabilizing force at best, and at worst, I think we know what motivates them. I think this is playing with fire. And this is going to be a theme throughout today's episode, Eric. Where the heck is Congress?
Yeah.
There is so much that depends on checks and balances. That's my worry. It's important. It's important to the United States. It's important to world geopolitical stability. We have demonstration of that. We have an adversary that has made it clear that they want to take over this role. And we have an administration that seems to be doing one-off actions without having articulated how they're gonna protect against those deleterious consequences.
Yeah, we've talked about before the value in the stable coins and how we think there's a lot of good opportunities there, a lot of goodness there. And even with the Genius Act establishing
Yep.
some of that. But I think because this is not just stablecoin, this is also speculative crypto in general, there's a lot of inherent lack of transparency there. And so anyone could purchase these coins, right? You could get investment from foreign folks, and it's a little harder to track some of that. This
Sure.
is not something new of elected officials benefiting from some of their knowledge and time in office, but I think it's an added wrinkle there with the crypto nature of it. Do you think that, speaking of which, there's legislation being put forth right now of banning elected officials, Congress and senators, from being able to sell stocks, buy and sell and trade stocks during their elected time? What are your thoughts on that legislation?
Yeah, so first, I'll just go back to you and I talked about this. I think we think it's a good move for the United States to establish a position on digital currency. It is the way things are moving. We want to be the leader in it. So it's not the top line that I think bothers either of us. It's how we're going to affect it. On the do I think elected officials should be able to get briefings and buy and sell individual stocks based on that? No.
Yeah.
No.
45 days later, they'll tell you what they bought.
Yeah, no. No, and
Yeah.
you know what's so funny to me on this one, you know this, there are lots of things that set my hair on fire. One of them is this line that says, "We can't have unelected bureaucrats making decisions about what we do as a nation." I don't know, I trust the unelected bureaucrats more in many cases, and I like the tension. When I was in a leadership position, if there was any of my financial holdings that intersected the work I was doing, and in my case, there was the potential for a lot because I had a career in technology. You had to divest it, right?
Mm.
Or at the very least, change it over to a mutual fund or something, and so, I don't think it's a right, I don't think it hurts America that you can't, I just think there's nothing good about creating a protected class, and this goes all the way to the top, that because they have access to special information, they can benefit disproportionately from the average bear.
I agree.
And can I just jump on that thing? I say average bear a lot. Let me define that. If you're in my demographic group, Yogi Bear was one of my Saturday morning cartoon staples. And the tagline was, "I'm just an average bear." And I have always had that as a stalking horse for making sure that elitism didn't creep in to what we were doing.
Do you think you had to divest those assets or those investments because you had execution authority, like you had budget
Yep.
authority, whereas Congress doesn't? Or you think it's because they're able to write the rules that they write them differently for themselves?
Well, they certainly write them differently for themselves, but here's how I thought of it, Eric.
Yeah.
I probably could have fought any one of them. I think I could have gotten all righteous on it and said, "I would never," and that would be true. I would never. Our listeners have listened to us for 9 episodes now. I don't know if they think we're particularly smart, but I do think they understand how we think about things. So I would never do anything that appeared to create personal advantage for anything. I don't think that's true. I did because I don't even you talked about being close to the line. I don't wanna be anywhere near the line. I don't even wanna
Yeah.
see the line,
Above reproach.
right? And so
Yep.
I probably did more than I had to, but it oddly just protected my thinking. And I would go back to the president and I would say, "If you've got billions to trillions of dollars at stake, are you absolutely sure you're not doing something for you?"
Yep.
Yep.
All right. Moving on to the U.S. forces being deployed to the South Caribbean. In 1989, then Bush 41
How old
White
were you,
House,
Eric?
I was in December of 1989, I had just turned 2. Yeah.
All right, so we'll turn this one over to you.
In 1989, the Bush 41 White House sold Operation Just Cause to the American public with 4 objectives. One of them, combating drug trafficking. Even though Panama's general and leader through puppet government, Manuel Noriega, had already been indicted in U.S. courts on cocaine trafficking and racketeering charges. In other words, the narcos narrative served as a convenient frame for regime pressure and eventual regime change. Fast forward to September 2025, the United States has unleashed a sweeping military buildup in the southern Caribbean, 3 warships, thousands of troops, F-35s repositioned to Puerto Rico, all under the banner of counter-narcotics action against designated narco-terror groups like Tren de Agua. A strike on September 2nd killed 11 alleged traffickers aboard a boat leaving Venezuela. Some have speculated that the drug war is a facade masking deeper strategic aims, rattling Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, undermining his alliances with China, Russia, Iran, and signaling leverage over Venezuela's vast oil resources and foreign investment entanglements. So, Venezuela is part of China's Belt and Road Initiative that we've talked about numerous times before. They signed a cooperative MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, in September of 2018, and Beijing upgraded ties to a, quote, all-weather strategic partnership during Maduro's 2023 state visit. New Chinese oil hardware is now landing. A $1 billion China Concord project has brought a floating production unit to raise output under a 20-year deal. Moscow and Caracas signed a strategic partnership pact in May of 2025. Defense and energy are explicit pillars. Venezuela also opened a Kalashnikov ammunition plant in July of 2025 with capacity of up to 70 million rounds per year. And finally, Caracas has Iran-designated armed drones in its inventory after years of cooperation. Recent reporting says Iranian specialists still oversee key facilities. So we haven't had a friend in Caracas since before 1999. And Hugo Chavez when he came to power and then transitioned to Maduro following his death. So it would be nice to have a better relationship with that country. For those who don't remember many things before they turned 3, as you mentioned, Sue, I just turned 2 when Operation Just Cause kicked off. What do you remember about this? Do you see a parallel between the actions of Bush 41 and what we have going on now? And what do you think about the deployment of these U.S. forces?
Yeah, I guess there's a kind of top line parallel. I do remember 1989. I do remember the action against Noriega. One of the objectives was actually to remove him and to restore democratic governance and to protect U.S. citizens and secure the Panama Canal. So we had lofty goals. And one of the things that went right was it was a quick military success. Noriega was captured within weeks. As you say, he had already been indicted, and so there was some justification. The Indara government was installed, and U.S. public and Panamanian public were mostly supportive. I will say what went wrong was civilian casualties, and there were lots and lots of them. There was international condemnation, and if you look at the time frame and look at the conversations we have now about regime change, I think you could almost go back to 1989 and say, what has made us so skitterish, or what could have made us more skitterish about regime change? Now, Panama was pretty easy, but we suffered a lot of condemnation. And I think there were lots of accusations of overreach, and I think it was the classic, you're being a bully. If you look at what Trump is doing, I think the objectives, they say them, but I think they're much muddier. They want to assert military presence in the hemisphere. They want to counter perceived smuggling, and they want to project deterrence against the regional adversaries. And I think there is something in that if I squint at it, I can say, yeah, we've been countering the drug trade for a long time through interdiction. Maybe it's time to increase the cost because they built that cost into their operations. And we blew that boat out of the water, and U.S. forces are deployed around it. I guess where I come down is I have 3 concerns. Number one, the cognitive dissonance between the Trump administration saying, oh, no, I need to be friendly with Putin. You want me to be friendly with Putin, and attacking the people in our hemisphere, particularly someone sitting on the oil reserves that Venezuela has, particularly with the relationship that we have had over the years with Venezuela. I just don't know how to reconcile those two things. Do we really want to pick that fight in our own hemisphere? So that feels like it doesn't make sense to me in terms of stated goals of having to have relationships with people who are economically beneficial to the United States. And from a security perspective, we can go back to even when I was 3 and Cuban Missile Crisis, and Bay of Pigs was 100% about not allowing threats into our hemisphere. Now we're
Yeah.
the threat in our hemisphere. So I think that's interesting on that one. The other thing, I have great fondness for congressional oversight. I don't like it when it's happening to me. I think they can be buttheads and impose on us overhead that then they come back and yell at us for effecting and being slow. But by and large, with national security, particularly operational activities like intelligence, like defense activities, you need oversight. Absolutely, the Constitution prescribes it. And again, I'm only going on the things that I hear about whether that oversight has been done or whether things have been briefed. But to me, it's more than just the requirement for it. It is, and I experienced this in the intelligence community. Intelligence and defense are so intentional. And what I mean by that, it's going to be hard for some people in America to believe, is we intend to do good. And sometimes intention drowns out reality or prudence. In other words, not everything can you do, should you do. And
Yep.
so one of the things that oversight does for national security operations is it provides that governor on, have you really thought about it? And I think if we squint at this administration, we would say, boy, that would be helpful. And also the nation has a really long history of trying to stop drugs with counter-narcotic programs. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try it, but I'm not sure that we have articulated, like we did in '89, what we expected to accomplish by the action we took. So I think it's hard for us. I love your point about nice to have a friend in the hemisphere, but I think before we get there, we need to do some looking at what was our objective, how did we articulate it, how do we measure it, and did it meet both national and international standards? And we seem to have a hard time with this, whether it was the bombing of Iran or this, right? It's just, trust me, it was the right thing to do. And without articulation of the objectives, pretty hard to measure whether those objectives were met. So do I think the free world ends on this? No. Do I think it serves our national reputation? No. Mm, I haven't seen the argument about the tangible impact on drug, with the exception of possibly increasing the carrying costs of affecting the drug trade. So I think it deserves scrutiny.
I don't think that there's any disputing Trindagua,
Mm-mm.
some bad guys. There is some healthy skepticism about whether they are very participatory in the narcotics trade, more of a money laundering and human trafficking enterprise, and also worth being skeptical about their connection with the Maduro government, as we've talked about before. And I can also see the connection between drugs coming into this country and killing Americans.
Yeah.
And we've designated them as a terrorist organization. But best I can remember, the war on terror is over. We need to re-up that with Congress if we're going to continue declaring war and the use of lethal force.
Yeah. So here are the balancing things that you talked about. Number one, you have China, Russia, others cozying up to Venezuela in our hemisphere, make
Yep.
real investments, whether it is blackmailing kind of investments or whether it is really social economic developments, I don't know, but they're cozying up. And so that has to be countered somehow. I don't know that making us the bad guy works. But again, show us the national security strategy and let's talk about that. The other thing is, it feels so extra legal from just a who we are
Yeah.
perspective. Might be the exact right thing to do. I don't think I've turned into someone who's completely a pacifist, but I do like knowing what we're trying to achieve and that we're still a nation of laws. And I'm not inside the wire anymore, so it's conceivable, but I sure don't see it right now.
But we would like some transparency and to know more
Yeah.
about what's going on, right? I think there's value there.
I think we should have a little transparency, the most transparent administration of all time. Yeah, I think we should have that.
That's right. Speaking of congressional oversight, Senator Mark Warner, Virginia's senior senator and vice chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, was preparing a routine classified oversight visit to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, headquarters in Springfield, Virginia, and a fireside chat with NGA leader, Navy Vice Admiral Trey Whitworth. But the visit was canceled, not due to any conflict in Congress, but because far-right activist Laura Loomer discovered the meeting online and blasted it on social media, accusing Warner and Vice Admiral Whitworth of anti-Trump bias. Loomer proudly claimed credit, calling it, quote, Loomered. Warner likened this to authoritarian overreach, asking, is congressional oversight dead? He warned that allowing fringe influencers to dictate whether lawmakers can fulfill their constitutional mandate is a dangerous precedent, especially when the agency is literally part of his home state and his constituents. So, Sue, as a veteran of the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency yourself and a former resident of the Commonwealth of Virginia, what are your thoughts about this?
Yeah, Mark Warner is one of the great overseers on the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence and historically has had a great relationship, whether he was the chairman or whether he was the ranking member. And the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence has long been considered the most apolitical of any. And so Mark has been a great member of oversight. Not easy, but great. And his background, I think he was T-Mobile, maybe, big tech guy.
Mhm.
He's neither easy nor cheap, but he is well-intended, and he does put you through paces. I remember when I was the director of the Information Operations Center, was the first time I had in Cave back in I'm gonna say 2007, had him over for same thing, a tour and a fireside chat. We became fast friends, and the number of issues that we solved because of the things that we understood together, not agreed on everything, together, was really in the nation's interest. So that's one. The second thing Mark has been terrific at is he has been a great representative of the women and men who are his constituents. In a government shutdown, he is incredibly communicative to his constituents. So that's the backdrop of him coming out to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, which, by the way, of all the intelligence agencies, is one of the ones that has the most diverse, openly useful, impactful missions because what it does is imagery and mapping. And there's something incontrovertible about your ability to show what's happening without just straight up assessment. And so this notion that somebody just decides that this can't happen, it's Looney Tunes and it's destructive. And
Looney Tunes?
it is Looney Tunes. It's destructive. And what does she know? Did she go and have a meeting with Mark and say, what are you going to talk about? These people are the ones who are politicizing it. And what they're doing is they're painting others who typically do their national security job apolitically as I fear you do protest too much. So incredibly damaging. And now they just announced that Trey Whitworth is going to be leaving NGA. Now, really
Oh,
great
really?
person is going to
Uh,
succeed him, Lieutenant General Bradenshire. But so I don't know if that was already in the offing. But this is yet another where you have someone who, based on a top line belief buttressed by no knowledge is affecting our security. And as you and I talked last week in our bonus episode, you're affecting real humans. And the cruelty of that and the absoluteness of it is ridiculous. But Mark Warner, remember in my confirmation hearing, he put me through my paces, and then the chairman said, Mark, if you're not going to ask her the tough enough questions, I'm going to have to go in. Mark is motivated by national security. He is also a politician, but he separates those two things when he leaps into the fray with us. And yeah, Looney Tunes, the best thing I can think of.
Yeah, I like that. Looney Tunes, Loomer,
Or Loomer Tunes.
Loomer Tunes.
And Eric, since I've left government, I have made it a point to not besmirch individuals when I wasn't part of the decision they made. But for someone who holds no position, who cannot be held accountable to do things that affect national security, I just think we need to call out.
Yeah, she could say whatever she wants, and to call out and to question this is absolutely valid.
Yeah.
But then they say he's the ranking member and he's going to do oversight, and these are constituents. Okay, that makes sense. Let's go have a talk. And how valuable is that for the women and men of the NGA to have their leadership come out and talk? And it's probably one of the limited opportunities they get to see from the director too.
Yeah, hugely important, and especially Mark, because if you've ever seen Mark, and it's one of the things I like most about it, when I say he's not careful, I don't mean that in terms of he's casual. He is willing to give his best insight. I think he has been one of, and I used to be able to name a whole bunch of others, but I think he is one of our oversight representatives that, and walk out of this administration and go back to other times when you need to go and talk to the oversight committees. The idea that you have a Senate Select Committee where the chair and ranking member can talk to each other, and when you feel comfortable in going talking to them, tell me how that doesn't serve national security. It does. And so the idea that you pick on Mark because he happens to be a Democrat, yes, he is. But I think to suggest that he is somehow untoward is not only misguided, but it runs the risk of damaging what has served us so very well.
Maybe we need to put together a panel at NGA. Mark Warner, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas.
Yeah.
And Admiral Whitworth can moderate it.
Yeah, I think that's been one of the problems. I love that you said that, is in the first Trump administration, the Senate Select Committee with Mark Warner and Richard Burr, and then Mark Warner and Marco Rubio were really effective as a two-party leadership of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence.
Yeah.
During that same first Trump administration, the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence was a train wreck. They erected walls between their working spaces. You couldn't get
literal silos.
Yeah. You couldn't get a meeting with one, and no one wants a meeting with one side.
Right.
Unless you can't get a meeting with both sides. You're taking a storyline that, in my experience, isn't true. You're affecting it with no knowledge, and you're damaging the intelligence product. And that's really hard for me to put up with, or with which to put. I don't know how you say that.
Well, I'm sure we'll be talking about this again and following this story as it develops, especially with the NGA transition.
Yeah.
Moving on, last week we talked a lot about rural America and specifically with farming and agriculture with respect to national security. And continuing it on in that theme, national security used to mean tanks, troops, and territory. But as Lauren Buida, a former national security analyst and CEO at Girl Security, a nonprofit building the future of national security, writes in Forbes last week, that old map doesn't fit the terrain anymore. Today's threats, pandemics, cyber attacks, supply chain failures, they don't wait for a declaration of war. They hit us in the local level first, at the school board, the hospital, and the transit station. Her point, Cities don't just absorb the impact, they're part of the defense. They operate the infrastructure, hold the workforce, and house the people most vulnerable to disinformation and disruption. And if we keep thinking of national security as something, quote, federal, we'll keep missing the front lines. Ms. Buidam makes the case that security is about systems, not just soldiers or Marines, and that includes public trust. And that takes us back to a theme we explored last week. Trust is grown locally, whether it's on a family farm in Iowa or in a crowded clinic on Chicago's South Side. People know what safety feels like. It's food on the table, clean water, reliable power, and the confidence that their community won't be left behind when disaster strikes. So, what did you make of this idea of the diluted definition of national security? If everything is a priority, nothing is a priority. And my follow up question is, have we been guilty in this podcast of piling too many things into that bucket of national security?
Yeah, as a general rule, if everything's important, nothing's important. And I think we've been trying, you and I have been trying as we've gone through the episodes to remind ourselves what we think we're doing, which is talking about security issues that affect Americans and
Yeah.
putting them in context. And so it's conceivable we've been a little dilutive. I think we're finding our way, but I'm thinking about Lauren's article, and I really encourage you to read it. I encourage you to follow Lauren and Eric. Maybe we'll have Lauren come on and talk with us. I think the pandemic should have taught us that and before that, terrorism should have taught us that almost all security threats end up being locally impactful, particularly in a modern world. Yeah, yep. We should have not let 9/11 happen, but 9/11 affected New York. The pandemic, boy, that was felt in cities and towns everywhere, and because we didn't have focus on supply chain or know what the supply chain issues were, or know what was important, and know where we needed to get information or how we share information because we had been so centralized in how we thought about national security, I think we didn't do very well on those 2 things. So I think, to me, the war on terror and the pandemic should have taught us, and I think so that's what you and I try and embrace, is this notion that national security, when it fails, is locally felt. And in a digitally connected world where economics and cyber and talent and supply chain are real considerations, I think that makes it okay to me that we are trying to get from big security issues to local impact. The best thing I think we do, Eric, and I think it's something that is when we talk about citizens deciding what's important to them and then asking questions of their state legislatures and their leaders in terms of what's being done about that. So I think even before you develop an action plan, I do think you have to start thinking about it as a real issue. If I go all the way up the food chain to I was thinking about all those billionaires sitting around the table with President Trump Thursday last week. I don't know that they understand how much they benefit from the rule of law. Trying to tie decisions we're making at the national level to actions made by people who don't think they are national decision makers is something we're trying to do. So, yeah, I think it's a quest you and I are on, Eric, to be really intentional about how we tell that story. I loved what we did last week on agriculture. I think it's interesting that since we did that story, there's just a whole brouhaha about who's responsible for saving farms, but it's a conversation we ought to have about whether it's important. So I think Lauren's right. I do think we have to be careful about not being dilutive. I think it is hard sometimes to tether. I love talking about situation, behavior, impact. Here's the situation is we're not investing in university research. The behavior is we're willy-nilly cutting. The impact is that things like GPS, ARPANET chips aren't gonna be available because of the cuts we make right now. So, I think if you and I can be ruthless about that model when we bring something up, maybe we can help, maybe we'll get Lauren to help us.
Yeah. I think staying constituent focused,
Yeah.
right? You can have plenty of policies for things that go on overseas. I was trying to think, does this interconnectedness come from air travel and the invention of the airplane? Is it more the internet and the global economic system? And I think you want to transport as much of that threat offshore as you can and put it far away as you can, whether that's through soft power and diplomacy or hard power and military action. But your resilience comes down to what you have at home and trying to stay constituent focused.
Great point, Eric. I just love that. So you think about the decisions we made in the 90s and in early 2000s about offshoring foundational capabilities of communications because we wanted the high revenue things and we were going to offshore.
Yeah,
Or
we'll
we
do
wanted the
the
high profit. We're
services.
going to
Yeah,
offshore the high revenue things. And that there's a sense of that, you say, in a free and fair global economy, there's a sense to that, and then, well, bam, we realize that those decisions were made by people who don't understand the risks they put us at when we got rid of the underlying broadband layer, and China just decided, "Oh, we're gonna own that." And
yeah,
last week, we talked about China buying up land. We could have talked about China buying up spectrum. And
sure.
so back to this point of trying to articulate plus, I need to hear the song again, Eric, so maybe we'll come to it soon.
Oh, yeah,
Uh,
we need another who's responsible.
yeah, of this notion of these big national security issues, how do we get how do we articulate who the national security decision makers are, and how do we get them to be wise enough to make them even when statute and policy isn't enough? Anyway,
You mentioned research earlier, and Harvard has been the headline,
yeah.
but the real story is leverage. I think federal dollars buy research capacity, talent pipelines, norms. You pull those dollars abruptly, and you don't just punish Harvard, you shock the local economies, slow the long horizon science and some of the things that they had to work, and then limit the national labs, partner ecosystem. You've also noted before the three things the government's good at: big problems, long time horizons, and deep pockets. And that's the logic for federal research. So we've talked about mRNA platforms before, decades of NIH and DoD, or now DOW support before COVID, GPS, the early internet, and classic staples like Tang and Velcro. So markets are phenomenal at sprints. Democracies win the marathons. And so basic research is a marathon, and cities and universities are some of our tracks to develop a lot of that really instrumental stuff. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you think the implications are to cuts to research and limiting some of this?
So my top line is the same criticism that I have of Doge, of the heads of our departments, and quite frankly, even some of the topics we talked about today is it is not obvious to me that there's an articulation of where you're trying to go. Just because science isn't super important to you doesn't mean it's not important to Lauren's definition of national security. And I think you and I have talked about this many times from biomedical and public health. We've talked about mRNA, computing and digital infrastructure that came out of ARPA. I think Google is adorable to be super proud of themselves, but they basically built on the work of the Department of Defense. Space and Earth Science, I think I gave this example before. When we decided to toss satellites up into space to see what was going on over the horizon and invested in imaging, the mammograms that save millions of life came from the investment in image processing that was a result of the national security investment. And it's not that the scientists change, it's who's going to make the investment. I don't know if we've talked about In-Q-Tel in any depth, Eric, but In-Q-Tel in 1999 was a new way to take advantage of the speed of the commercial sector and the reality that they weren't gonna invest in things that were hard to do. And so that tension between speed and purpose is something that has really served us well. Agriculture and food security, energy and environment. We won the Cold War because of science. And we had good science because we had immigrants. Just there's a whole thing here. So I'm not saying that all research done by every university hasn't drifted. I'm not
Mhm.
saying that all national security leaders are looking over time to make sure that they're not just continuing work that is no longer yielding expected results. We should always be incredibly mindful of the dollars that the American people give to the government. But my worry is, especially in research, is that if you're too myopic or if you're if your president is a businessman and you have a businessman's view of what's valuable, you can start making some serious mistakes. And again, the downstream effect is huge.
Some of the concern is they're taking federal dollars, right? Harvard
Right.
has plenty of their own money,
Ton
right? They've got one of the best endowments and funds around, but they're taking federal funds, and as a result, they should be subject to federal rules,
absolutely.
right?
100%.
But how valuable is that counter opinion or that counter indication when you're talking about preventing groupthink and thinking outside the box and developing new solutions?
I don't know about you, Eric, but when your only metric is that something works, that narrows your vision of what you try and do. There are audacious things, audacious problems that we need to solve. What's going on in space right now is so interesting in terms of the audacious problems about if what we're worried about is nuclear weapons in space, what are the ways that we are able to actually positively identify something that is nefarious on orbit? That's a hard problem. And if you're like, yeah, but you better in 2 years have something that works, you're going to have something that works, whether it's something that delivers the outcome. So, this tension between how much you need it to be done and how much you need it to do is, I think, where research at its best, and that tension between national security and universities and commercial is where we have great advantage. Listen, we spend too much money as a federal government. Totally do. And there are days when
Yep.
I say, just cut the federal budget in half and let's start again. The problem is with the workforce we're left with right now, I'm not sure that we'd get to the outcome we wanted. I'm not sure that the people that are in place are the ones that had the vision that we need. But I'm not anti fiscal conservatism. I am concerned that if you can take no risks, you won't be prepared. And this is something that the government is good at. It's what our dollars are good at. Companies, Google, Uber, name it, go make a buck off of it. If it's important, but let's make sure that it's not ungoverned.
Yeah. I think also cutting funding just because it's someone who doesn't agree with you is incredibly short-sighted as well. Because that's part of the value of the universities and the higher education in this country is develop diversity of opinion. And I guess that's the bad D word, right? But diversity of opinion sharpens your own beliefs, right? One of the best things you can do to establish your own beliefs is to go debate someone who disagrees with you, and they'll either A, introduce you to something new and you'll think about the problem differently, or it'll reaffirm what you've already believed, and maybe you'll spread some of your knowledge to someone else too.
Yeah, this is diving into too much of the Sue Gordon story, but I'm a third
We
kid.
like your anecdotes.
I'm a third kid of a naval officer. Man, we were raised on Father Knows Best and Leave It to Beaver. There was right and wrong, good and bad, up and down. Good people did this, bad people did that. Good people never smoked or drank, bad people smoked and drank. And because I revered my family, and thank goodness for the foundation they gave me, that's where I went trundling off to Duke. right? As this very narrow, very kind of good and bad one way about thinking of the world. And then the weirdest thing happened is that I met people who I liked.
What?
I know, and who were smart and who were different from me. And you will appreciate this, Eric. I married one of them. Like, in no world before I went to Duke and had my horizons expanded by people who were antithetical to my beliefs and saw that, "Ooh, that's pretty good." Would I have given Jim Gordon the time of day? And so I don't like that diversity has become a negative. Everyone knows that diversity is good. If I hadn't read Catcher in the Rye, I would not be the woman I was, right? If my parents had decided, you know what, Sue, you just will not even read that language, I would not be the woman I am. So I just think this trying to curate in either direction one view of right, and I think this is what the American people said, and I think there's a little bit of this force that what's going on in education right now is, did the universities over-rotate on liberalism, and did they make it unhospitable instead of for liberal ideas, like when I went to college, made it inhospitable for our conservative ideas, but I'm just saying that I just would encourage us to not choose one or the other.
Yeah, that's, I think, some of the problem with some of the banned books. And we've talked about with AI training as well. I think you've got to train it on the whole
To
wealth of the human experience, right? Because then you otherwise limiting some of the solutions that you'll have and some of the ideas that came out of some things you may not necessarily agree with.
Yeah, you're super good at this. You've taught me so much about AI. I really, and whether that is because it came to the fore in business school, I would just say that one of the things you're great at, in addition to talking about you just simply cannot ignore cultural differences. It's why you and I both reacted super negatively to the federal government mandating the models that localities were gonna use. I'm like, "Really?" But the
Yeah.
other thing that I think you're super good on is just thinking about teaching people, because AI's here, how to expand how they think about prompts and how to get prompts to do the kinds of expansive thinking that they're not gonna naturally do. So talk a little bit about that.
I've found through personal experience and talking with a lot of folks that it's not just garbage in, garbage out, but the way you write the prompt, the amount of information you give it, how you tailor to your AI system makes a huge difference in what comes out. And any data engineer, data scientist will tell you the same thing as they're analyzing data, right? But one of the things that'll, I think, help you and save you a lot of time and make you more efficient in whatever line of work or even in your personal life is that critical thinking element and that questioning element and that diversity of opinion that'll help shape some of the questions you ask that'll then funnel into your AI that will get you better results. And I think there is some value in the higher education system we get from that.
Hey, and to that point, you kinda have to practice it, and I think higher education has to keep embracing it. How do they teach in a world where that is an important element of anyone's
Yeah.
research and thinking?
I think that's a great point because you can't just ask the question and then walk away. You need to critically think about the answer, right? Because of hallucinations, don't be afraid to ask, where'd you get that? Can you show me your sources?
Yeah.
Cite your sources. And then also going back and saying, well, that wasn't really the answer that I wanted. Maybe I need to change my question, turn the mirror back around. And even though the AI didn't give me the response that I wanted, let me reshape that, continue down this thread, or refine my prompts to get better. But what I was going to say is higher education has become extremely expensive.
Yeah.
And to the point that I was told by my parents that I had to go to college, right? Wasn't told what I had to do, wasn't told where I had to go, what I needed to study, but that I would go to college. And I'm very appreciative that they pushed me to do that. I wouldn't be in the position I am today without having gone to the universities that I have. However, I don't know that that's the right answer for my children or what I'm going to push, right? You think of some of these folks who go to college and are walking out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and You reminded me of the quote from Good Will Hunting. You wasted $150,000 on an education you could have got for $1.50 in late fees at the public library. Matt Damon's character, Will Hunting. And if you take that $150,000 in inflation adjusted dollars from 1997, that's $301,914.02 at a 2.53% inflation rate. So you're talking about $300,000 in debt for having gone and gotten your liberal arts degree or your underwater basket weaving degree when you don't even do that job. And instead, folks could have gone to a trade school and been making six figures in their mid-20s doing something they enjoy instead of slogging through college and ending up with all this debt.
I love this conversation. Let's riff a bit. Back when I went, and right on the cusp of where you went, having a college degree was enough. I got Eric. I have a
Sure.
bachelor's degree in zoology, and I became the senior most intelligence officer in America, right? Oh, and I worked hard along the way, and
Yep.
I learned new things. But to get in, that was pretty much all I needed. So I think step one is it's not the coin of the realm that it used to be. So that's number one. And so you have to think
Right.
about the coin of the realm. The two is, I will say early on in my career, I got a job in a really cool branch doing space policy, and I was briefing ambassadors and senators, and because I taught good, they'd roll me out, and I was getting lots of psychic rewards from being the person that was so young and doing so much. I had a boss who came in new, and he didn't like women, and he didn't like women who didn't have a degree in engineering, and 2 check marks against Sue Gordon. And I came back from a business trip, and I had been moved not from the cool kids I'd been moved from the cool kids branch into the grunt branch, and not only in the grunt branch, what I mean by that is doing backbreaking physical, technical data crunching that only we did in the early '80s because we didn't have computers that could go through all the stuff that we have now.
Yep.
And worse, the account, the kind of satellite that I analyzed was the most boring of all satellites, guaranteed to never, ever give me an experience to talk to anybody. And as I look across the arc of my career, I will say that decision by that boss changed the trajectory of my career, because if I had just been someone who talked good, if I had just been someone who was analytical rather than someone had a craft, and I would say, and I don't think you have to go to college to do this, but I do think everyone has to go through learning a craft, and it hardly matters which craft you learn, but you have to be able to do something in order to be able to speak authoritatively about what anyone else must do, because if you don't go through that wicket, you're just a philosopher prince. So I think you can do that without a college degree, but I do think that we should be careful about saying learning how to think is enough. No, you also have to learn how to do.
Yeah, that's true. Because that is a lot of what jobs and hiring managers are looking for, is that you're able to commit to something, you're able to stick with it. You're overcoming adversity. You're able to show up at 8 a.m. on a Thursday for class and pass your tests and stuff like that just to get you in the door. But I think it's not for everybody.
It's
And
not.
backing off some of this emphasis, Mike Rowe, the guy famous on Dirty Jobs from the Discovery Channel a couple years ago, he's taken this on through his Micro Works project. And he said a couple things about, we're lending money we don't have to kids who can't pay it back to train them for jobs that no longer exist
That's
as we transition to AI and some of the digital age. And at the same time, the AI data center build out screams for the trades: electricians, linemen, HVAC techs, welders, fiber installers, power electronics. The AI revolution isn't just coders, it's riggers and relays. And we've talked about that a lot before too, with respect to the infrastructure we need and these technicians. So I think it's a good for everyone to follow their passion.
Yep.
And it's really good for a lot of people to go to a 4-year university, but it's not necessarily good for everyone.
Yeah, and you shouldn't have to go into debt in a four-year liberal arts college in order to be able to make living wage. Fact to know or forget, I worked with an amazing CIA officer named Cindy Stockman, probably one of my favorite people to partner with as a leader, and she was as blue collar as they come from Baltimore, and so you know me, Eric, on the literal scale, I am not. Cindy's bestie and high school classmate was Mike Rowe, and her
Very cool.
affection and admiration for him, I think, says everything about what you were saying about us needing to make that okay too. Huzzah.
Let's get back to Lauren's article a little bit and get your thoughts on some of her aspect of gender safety and civic participation. So she talked a little bit about if women and girls don't feel safe on transit, online, or at campus, your city loses labor, leadership, and legitimacy. Safety isn't a side quest, it's an operating system. And I think that reminds me a little bit of what you brought out in the open about reaching talent where they're at. And some of these folks who are very talented individuals, but may not be willing to relocate geographically because of proximity to family or just the other barriers associated with cost and new to community, not knowing anyone. They're not wanting to leave El Paso or Juarez or Chicago South Side in the case of Lauren. What are your thoughts there on some of her safety and infrastructure thoughts and meeting people where they're at?
So I love this topic. And remember, we were talking about the census
Yeah.
and who should be included in the census. And you and I had a conversation. I think I was pretty strong on this. And that is, it's two separate issues. If they are in our country, they are ours. They are ours. We have responsibility. We can do other things. We can have a better immigration policy. We can clean up the streets. We can do things. But the idea that we are going to choose winners and losers in terms of safety, relevance, decency, I think is antithetical to who we are as a nation. The trend with women right now is so bad. It I try really hard not to ascribe intent if I wasn't in the room when decisions were made. But if you're a woman in America right now, there are two things you feel. One, you feel that you don't have the same rights. And two, as a result of that, you feel like you're not being protected. And how are we going to live with more than half of our population, more than half of the people that have advanced degrees, not feeling safe and included? I love Lauren's point that this is a national security issue because you can't throw away talent. I was thinking about the I was thinking about the Florida Surgeon General's pronouncement on
Yep.
I can't remember what show he was on yesterday. We said well, he was asked, "Have you done any research to see what's gonna be affected when you take away the vaccine mandates?" And he said, "Absolutely not. This is an issue of right and wrong. This is an issue of parents' rights." 'Kay? How many women feel safe in Florida in terms of their parents' rights when they go to their doctors and express what they need to do for health? So this I think there is a really it's below the surface, but it is hard to miss if you're a woman that you are neither equal nor pr safe.
Yeah.
And I don't like the word protected because I don't you. I don't need a guy to protect me. I need the rule of law. It's craziness, and it's going backwards, and again, we need all the talent. We want anyone who has desire and everyone who has ability to be able to succeed. What is confusing about that?
Right. We want to reach our national potential and build our economies, our
Yep,
cities, our cultures, everything up. And we're going to limit ourselves by not reaching the potential of each individual if we're limiting them
yep.
because of some of these statements or rules. And many of these leaders have said before, to include the president, that folks are taking these things too seriously. It's a joke. You shouldn't say that. But Senator Tammy Duckworth had a quote over the weekend that I wanted to share with you is that I take what the President of the United States says very seriously because that is the respect that you have to give the office. And I think you've said that before about our leaders and some of your decisions in the past of recognizing the role you have, even though you may have your personal beliefs, but how's that going to make everyone else feel perceived or actual?
Hey, can I go back to the issue of women's safety?
Yep.
Y'all, Epstein. This is not about politics. This is not about power. This is not about names. This is about women who were abused. If we walk away from this, if we don't hold ourselves to account, no matter what account looks like, I don't know how we go forward. When I saw that press conference by the victims, I was so impressed that they were unilaterally not political about it. But I have no idea how only 4 Republicans in the House are gonna support the disclosure of the data that will allow these people. They're never gonna get their life back. It's not going to restore anything, but it is who we are, and it is one of the things that we do as a nation. For in the intelligence community, during the war on terror, one of the most damaging for those of us on the inside was this notion of enhanced interrogation and how the Senate looked at it and the ugly brush that we were painted with and all the reasons that we gave for why that story wasn't right. And here's what I learned at Northwestern in a business class on crisis management. In any crisis, there's a hero and a villain. And your job, if you want to manage it, is to become the hero as fast as you can, and you don't do so by explaining that you're not the villain. Think about that. It bugs me that Congress isn't doing oversight on a lot of fronts. I could probably forgive a lot of that as political. I do not understand this. I do not understand protecting people that harmed people that had no reason to be harmed, did nothing to deserve the outcome.
Well, it was really
Well,
good.
that was bouncy.
All right. What we're watching. So last week we talked about the Chinese meetup with Russia, India, North Korea. I think a lot of those guys were expected to be there, but Indian Prime Minister getting cozy with China is, as you mentioned, Sue, a little bit more concerning. So worth our country paying a little bit more attention
Yeah.
to that relationship, I think.
I think that's just gonna burble below the surface. The truth is, on one level, we all need each other. The question is, from each person's perspective, how do you secure the future we want? What happened last week was a little bit what I've been afraid of is that the world order has broken and China and Russia have reestablished themselves, and the US is trying to figure out, wait, what? Wait, what happened? And I think that's problematic. I think free and open societies are looking for the US to establish a position, and the longer we dither on this, I think the second and third order effects of democratic societies is gonna be felt.
Yeah. I'd be more okay with pivoting away from India. I don't think that's a great idea. But if we were filling that vacuum with a pivot towards Africa or a
Yeah,
pivot towards Brazil or more emerging economies, if we're not really doing much in the way of soft power projection,
right.
right? As we talked about. And then also last week, jobs growth cooling. I think no one should be surprised by that. What are you watching this week?
Yeah, one, I think this assault on data and truth and science is really problematic, right? It's a little bit of if nothing is trustworthy, how do you trust anything? And that's always been the thing we've depended on. So I think that's one. I'm watching Chicago.
Yeah.
I think if you want to riff on the Department of War, Eric, go ahead. But what I will just say is I don't know whether the counter to Trump has effectively pushed that off or whether it's coming next. But I think I'm watching that because this is just one more brick in the rule of law for us. And then the third thing I'm watching is Congress going to demand a hearing or a Gang
Hmm.
of Eight briefing. And just so everyone knows what a Gang of Eight briefing is, the leadership of the four committees: Armed Services, House and Senate, Intelligence, House and Senate, the ranking and minority members of the two houses. So that's how you get to eight. I think that has to come to light. Right,
Yeah.
and I think it's everything from I don't know anything about the North Korea escapade that just came out. I happened to miss that when I was in the DNI, but I think writ large, this question of, is Congress going to insist on its oversight role? And then I don't even know what to say about RFK.
Yeah. Was that an example of good oversight
Oh
of
my
those guys
god.
grilling him?
And a pox on Collins, and a pox on Joni Ernst. Don't be approving these people and then walking away and then having an opinion. You could have done something. You and I talk a lot about this, Eric. You got to own the space you have. And the way government works is you have all these silos, agencies, roles being affected by individuals who have to understand what that role is, and they beat themselves against each other. And you know that if everyone does their job, you'll come out with a good answer. I don't think anyone looks at what Congress is doing now and says they're doing a good job.
Right.
They're doing no job,
Yeah.
and it's starting to show. So,
Yeah. You can yell at people as much as you want in an oversight committee hearing to get your sound bites for your reelection campaign. But until you actually do something about it,
so if Collins begins impeachment proceedings, now I'm impressed. Shania Twain, now I'm impressed. That'll impress me
hmm,
much.
doesn't impress me much.
Yeah. What do you think,
Yep.
Eric? What are you looking at?
Yeah. I'm watching Venezuela still, seeing if that elevates at all and if there's any more pressure. I think I saw something before we started recording about how Venezuela is pledging to take a little more role in narco trafficking and owning some of that space. We'll see what that actually means and whether this is just too much of a leap from me on possible regime change and some of their connections.
Yeah,
But
so let's not be casual. If that action actually increased the cost enough for them to be more serious about the things they do, then you'd say, "Huzzah," right? Good job.
yep. You asked about the Department of War change. I think it's dumb. I think it's a waste of time and resources. I don't particularly care what the name is, but we're pretty well established as the DoD. DOW sounds stupid, I think. DoD sounds better. And just the administrative burden of changing all the placards. There's like all the money that's going to go into changing the signs and the letterheads and the logos around the world for what is the purpose? And to cite this woke agenda in 1947, coming off the Second War to end all wars, as being we went woke in 1947 under Truman. Come on, guys. I'm a firm proponent of lethality in our warfighters,
Me too.
but I think words have meaning. You can have that lethality and still strike fear in the hearts of your enemies. One minute you're killing a terrorist, and the next minute you're handing out food supplies to the impoverished nation, right? You got to be able to do all those things. And I think the DoD, the Department of Defense, represents that a lot better and translate better internationally.
Yeah, plus I just think it's a fundamental misunderstanding. Performative versus actual. I hadn't thought about DOW. Wasn't it the War Department? And maybe we
Yep.
identified the top 40 positions in the War Department, so it'd be WD 40.
Nice.
I know.
It's
And I won't
good.
even go down to whether those top 40 are greasy.
Heyo.
Heyo. Anyway. Yeah,
All right.
I think it's a consequential time, Eric. I think there's a lot of good. I continue to see people doing things that matter for their fellow citizens. So I'm not hopeless by any stretch. I don't think today looks very good, but tomorrow hasn't happened yet. And so I think that's what you and I are trying to do, is to talk about it so people can make decisions about what they do in order to own the space they have and protect the country that we love.
Yep. One more saved round. One thing that may be coming out of Texas tomorrow is there's rumors that James Tallarico's camp, he may be
Yeah.
announcing a bid for the United States Senate. So we'll see. If folks
Yeah.
haven't heard about him, he's a pretty solid dude.
He is a super solid dude. You will feel great about America. Again, I don't want to put anyone on a pedestal, but quality guy.
Yep. Seems to be doing it right. All right. That's what we're watching. Thank you for joining us, and no doubt there's more to come. This country's strength isn't in its power, industry, or government, but in its people.
Thanks for joining us this week. Remember, we're here for you. So look for a link in the show notes to provide feedback or suggest topics for next time. Join us next week for the Understandable Insights podcast, wherever you listen. And to everyone within the sound of my voice, go forth, do good, and for goodness sake, be kind to one another.